This podcast is sponsored today by Janet Brooks, Realty One Group. Realty One Group has 3 locations to conveniently serve you in North Kansas City, Overland Park, and downtown Lee Summit. I can personally recommend Janet as she sold my house a couple of years ago when I was making a difficult life transition. She also just helped my parents downsize and sell their house to find a new home closer to my sisters. Janet is knowledgeable, compassionate, and caring as she works to help you through the real estate process. I would highly encourage you to check out Janet or any of the agents at Realty One Group. Welcome everybody to Spirituality Adventures. This is a non-judgmental place to explore spirituality, and we're so glad you're here. This is a viewer and listener supported podcast, so we greatly appreciate your support. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Be sure and like, share, and subscribe to any of the social media content platforms that you're using. And then if you go to our website, spiritualityadventures.com, you can make a one-time donation, or with a monthly subscription, you'll gain access to our bonus content. We greatly appreciate it. Thank you for tuning in. Thanks for joining us at Spirituality Adventures. We are so honored to have Mark Whitacre with us today. Did I say it right? Whitaker?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Whitaker. And I have been listening to your story, reading about your story. Listening, I meant like I was listening to the Discovery Channel documentary and some of that. And honestly, it's one of the craziest stories. And I've heard a bunch. I've even done some crazy interviews on this podcast. So this ranks right up there with the former Prime Minister of Ethiopia that I interviewed. And he raised an army and overthrew a communist dictator back a couple decades ago. So, but at any rate, Mark, for our audience that doesn't know you, that might not know your story, why don't you give us a quick, like a really fast overview? Because then I want to dive into a couple of questions I have about your story with ADM, and then I want us to make sure we save some time for what you're doing now with Coke Consolidated and T Factor and all of that.
Good. Yeah, just kind of an elevator.
Where did you grow? Yeah, where did you grow up, and how did you meet Ginger, and kind of your school career, all that? Really, kind of a condensed version.
Yeah, kind of grew up north of Cincinnati, not far from where I'm at right now. I'm in Florence, Kentucky right now, about 15 miles from Cincinnati, but grew up north of Cincinnati near the Kings Island Amusement Park. Met Ginger. She was in 7th grade and I was in 8th grade when we met. We're married 42 years, which is a miracle itself, which we'll get into as we discuss a little bit later. But it's a miracle of God to be married 42 years with everything that she went through during the journey we're going to share. And went to Little Miami High School near Kings Island. Both of us went to Ohio State. I was senior class president. She was treasurer of the class. We were the homecoming king and queen, gifted student, at that time, excelled in school, tried to get work to get scholarships, which I got, where my parents couldn't afford some of the colleges that I was looking to go. Got a bachelor's and master's at Ohio State University and a PhD in biochemistry at Cornell in New York from an Ivy League school, full scholarship at all those 8 years.
That's
of
great.
Education. And during that time in Cornell, I would say that's probably when my downfall kind of started, because all I heard, I was 22 years old as a PhD student, graduated at 25. The average age is about 32. So I was about 10 years younger than most of the PhD students. But all I kind of heard is kind of the future we're going to have in corporate America with having an Ivy League PhD. So I kind of got caught up in that, the way the world defines success at age 22 when I became a PhD student, and couldn't wait to become a CEO of one of the largest Fortune 500 companies, in the world. Was kind of my goal already at 22 years of age.
Wow. And
it's amazing. By 32, I was divisional president of the 56th largest company in America. 70 billion in revenue, 30,000 employees, number 56 largest company on the Fortune 500. And I was divisional president at age 32, had my own jet. The 7 top executives had their own jet. I was number 4 ranked executive with 30,000 employees. And
was this about 1992 or
1989? I joined
89. Okay. Yeah.
Bought the CEO's home, a mansion, 13,000 square foot mansion. He was 75, wanted to move something smaller. Had a 69-year-old president and a 75-year-old CEO, and I was 32.
Wow.
And working right for them, and got caught up at 13,000 square foot house with an 8-car garage. And boy, this is an example of selfish leadership at that phase of my life. I had that position for almost 8 years.
In the jet set life.
I was Justin Bieber before Justin Bieber.
That's right. Yeah. Well, and so you started working at ADM, and I couldn't tell either from the documentary or the movie or reading the stuff. Was it your when you got involved in price fixing? Did that start originally with just this issue with the virus in the lysine
I tell you, the price fixing, it was proven in court, was going on for 12 years before I joined the company.
Okay.
12 years. So it was proven in a 7-week trial that it was ongoing. So basically in April of 92, once I was with the company for a couple of years and they trusted me, they came back and gave me a large bonus, $100,000 check and 25,000 shares of stock, which was about $1 million between the two. And it wasn't unusual to get a bonus, but it was kind of unusual to get a bonus at that time because everything was always based on performance of the division I was president of. And this was not on performance. So about an hour later, I knew what the bonus was for. The vice chairman came back to my office and he started sharing with me about now that I'm part of the family and that they try, and this had nothing to do with the virus or anything in the plan. This actually, that happened many months later, but this is just the price fixing, how I got involved. And they basically started sharing with me that now that the CEO is 78, keep in mind, he was 75 when I joined. This is a couple of years later, that he's 78 and the president is now in his mid 70s. They're going to start mentoring me to eventually take over that cartel, international cartel. So that's how, and that's proven in a 7-week trial. That's how the price fixing, my involvement, got started. But 7 months later, I'm sharing it with my wife, and that's when things got interesting.
It was hard to tell. So you were already involved in the price fixing. The virus issue really didn't have anything to do with the price fixing, or did it kick off?
It had nothing to do with the price. Price fixing was going on 12 years even before I joined the company, and that's well documented. 3 books, 7-week trial. I tell you what the virus had to do with the price fixing being exposed. Because
that's when did the FBI kind of start poking around at that point?
They did. Okay. They did. And I shared, I'm 7 months involved with the price fixing. And my wife said, she noticed me nervous. And she said, why would you be nervous? The FBI's trying to help with this virus. Why would you be nervous at all? And I started sharing with her, well, because this virus is nothing. We have $1 billion a year price fixing case that's been going for 12 years. And I'm involved with it myself now for 7 months, being mentored to take it over at some point. And sharing it with my wife is when the world changed, because she went, literally, she went and prayed about it. And she said, Mark, you're telling the FBI this today, or I'm telling them for you. So that's when the world changed. It was the exposure of the price fixing.
So Ginger, your wife,
she's the whistleblower in this case, without a doubt. And even in the 7-week trial, they made it clear, without Ginger, this case would have never been exposed.
Interesting. Yeah. Wow. She's got to be, as I've read about her and her story and all that, it's like, man.
And by the way, that's well documented. She speaks at lots of places all around the country about that.
She's got to be.
She started the case.
She's got to be an amazing woman. Awesome. Well, so you decide, the FBI, you tell them, and so I wouldn't say
I decide. I tried for 2 or 3 hours talking her out of it. She was not going to have it without the FBI. She said that's one of the largest. It became the largest price fixing case in U.S. history. It was close to $1 billion theft for over a decade. Every year, $1 billion theft. And the consumers paid for that when they go to the grocery store. And she thought of her grandma on Social Security, paying all these inflated prices for foods that had ADM ingredients in, like cereals and beverages. And, about any processed food has something from ADM in it. And that's where the case really, that's where it started. She was hands down said, Mark, God led me. She was a Christian 10 years before me. God led her to decision, and she was going to expose it with me or without me.
Wow. So you decide with the FBI, though, once you're talking to the FBI, to go to start wearing this tape.
Well, I had a choice. The day that I shared with the FBI, Ginger was with me. This would have been November 5th, 1992. So I'm a couple years with the company. I'm 34 years old instead of 32 when I joined them. And at that point, the FBI gave me a choice to either be arrested that day or wear a wire for them and go after the kingpins. I'm only involved 7 months, so to go after the kingpins that's been doing it for over a decade. Mm-hmm. The ones that were mentoring me and teaching me. Right. So that was a choice I had. And wearing a wire seemed a lot more attractive than being arrested.
So you did this for 3 years.
I did.
All over the world.
19 hours a day for 3 years. Yes.
You literally went around the world with this.
There was not a day go by except weekends that I wasn't wearing a wire for 3 years. Singapore, Hong Kong, Switzerland, all around the world where these meetings were held.
So for 3 years, you were 0014.
0014. Twice as smart as 007.
Was that your own thought?
No, that was all just keep in mind, they're wiring me at 6 every morning. They're having debriefings at night where I go over the tapes every night, sometimes till midnight. I mean, I saw them more than I did my family, these 3 agents. Yeah. So you build, you know what I mean? You build some camaraderie for 3 years.
Well, I heard you mention a green lamp because you had to get the audio, but then you were also trying to get video.
Well, the FBI wanted the video. They knew they were going up against one of the largest companies in the world. The audio, I had a tape recorder on my back, one in a briefcase, and a third tape recorder in a notebook at all times. That way, if one didn't work, they still could capture those conversations. So they had 3 different recorders on me, one on me and one on a briefcase, one on a notebook. But they knew that ADM would probably take it to court. So they wanted to be able to show a jury, not just the jury to hear it. They wanted the jury to see it. And that's where they had a green lamp. I would tell them where the meetings was going to be held. This was an olive green lamp. Looks like it came from a yard sale. And this green lamp would be at the Shangri-La Hotel in Singapore, $1,000 a night hotel with, looks like it came from a yard sale, sitting 5 feet from the 11 guys who were price fixing.
What did the FBI just slip in and put it there before you guys got there or something?
Yeah, I would tell them where the meeting, and they would meet with Interpol and the embassy.
Crazy. And nobody ever wondered about the green lamp.
And then it would be at the Mandarin Hotel in Hong Kong a couple weeks later. And it was at the Four Seasons Hotel in Chicago. It was in Maui, in Hawaii. It was at 2 or 3 meetings a month.
That's crazy.
Sitting 5 feet, 5 feet from the same guys. It's amazing they didn't notice it.
I loved your comment. If there'd have been a woman there.
Thank God. Listen, I tell you, Fred, I share it often. Thank God there wasn't a woman, because a woman criminal among us. Because a woman had said that green lamp was following us around the world.
That's funny.
That made a difference to the jury to see that play out.
Yeah. So as this 3 years went along, it's interesting. So can we jump to a little forward? And I want to ask you about the book that Kurt Eichenwald wrote.
Yeah, there's 3 books actually on the case. 3
right,
books.
But Kurt Eichenwald's was the one that Scott Burns wrote the screenplay for the Informant movie.
That's
and
correct.
Steven Soderbergh was the director, and Matt Damon played you.
Mm-hmm. My twin.
Right, and so I'm curious, did you have any input at all into Kurt's book or into the movie?
He interviewed me multiple times, dozens of times, and he interviewed the FBI. And so just like Jim Lieber, who wrote the other book, Rats in the Grain, and then my wife and I wrote a book called Mark Whitacre Against Odds, which is more our faith. It came out 10 years later because I became a Christian during that journey. So it's more of half the book is about the case, and the other book is kind of the faith journey, what's happened since. Because the other 2 books were published literally my 2nd month in prison. So they end in prison. They don't show the last 32 years of my life.
And, yeah. And so who's the way you're depicted in the movie? Did Matt Damon ever interview you?
The fact that here's what happened was they bought the right for the New York Times book the same time The Insider came out with Russell Crowe played the movie The Insider.
Right.
And that was a serious whistleblower tobacco story. And Steven Soderbergh said, gosh, after he read The Informant, because that's a serious drama. That's not a comedy. That's a serious.
Right.
It's like reading John Grisham, The Firm, because my wife and I feel like the movie we lived in was The Firm.
Right.
That's the story. And if you read Kurt Eichenwald's book, it is really more like The Firm. It's a serious drama. But what happened was when Soderbergh bought the rights of the book 9 years before the movie was actually done, and he had the script written 9 years before the movie was done, he told Scott Burns in the year 2000, a few months after The Insider came out, he said, these are the same story. He said, I don't ever want to be compared to Michael Mann. And he shared this he shared this publicly. He asked Steven Soderbergh why he chose to take a serious drama and turn it into a comedy. He said he didn't want to be compared to Michael Mann and The Insider. So he told Scott Burns, he said, turn this one into a comedy and it can never be comparable. Like he's making the same movie as the Brown and Williamson whistleblower, Jeffrey Wigand, Russell Crowe played in that.
Yep. So
that's why it became a comedy.
Okay.
He didn't realize it was going to take 9 years later before the movie would actually
out. Yeah. Interesting. So as you got toward the end of the 3 years of wearing the wire, there was this series of things that were going on as I was reading. It's like your ego was in there playing a role,
and pride, and
your mental health was playing a role. And the stress, like your wife, it sounds like, was even concerned. Like if you get found out, there could be dire consequences for you and your family. And so
even the FBI would tell us that with her with me. In the documentary, I felt captured some of that. I don't feel the movie captured.
The documentary definitely brought it out.
That the FBI felt that, boy, Mark, if these guys catch it, you could be killed. This is serious stuff.
So you had this dance going on between the stress, your mental health, and your ego. Yeah. At the end, that almost blew you apart, right?
Yeah. And to the point where the FBI changed, they don't allow anybody to wear a wire. I've done 6 events for the FBI, including the FBI Academy in 2011, Quantico. And they don't allow an informant to wear a wire longer than a year, partly by what they observed by someone wearing one for 3.
Because of what the stress did to you. They actually
changed their guidelines.
Yeah. I mean, I felt like I had a type of a meltdown at just a couple, 2.5 years ago with the influence of Xanax and alcohol and some bad decisions I made. So I really believe mental health is a big part of our spirituality and stuff like that. And I was just listening to this story and thinking about, can't even imagine the kind of stress you were under.
I was falling apart. I lost 60 pounds, Fred. People at work thought I had cancer because I kept thinking, what is this billionaire CEO, one of the largest companies in the world, what are they going to do with me when someday they learn I'm a witness against them? And I lost 60 pounds and I was falling apart. As you probably saw in the documentary, I felt they captured it better than the movie. I was blowing the driveway off leaves during thunderstorms at 3 a.m.
Yeah. And your wife was watching you and she's like,
and she would say, Mark, you got to come back to God. And I said, well, who needs God? I'm going to be the next CEO of ADM. I mean, I was just delusional by that point.
So you've said publicly that it resulted in you were just ready to take your life, basically.
Yeah, I did. I attempted suicide. I actually attempted suicide.
And was that before you got the prison sentence or after the prison sentence? That was
before. But I knew what the sentence was coming. So having the sentence had a lot to do with it. What happened was I had a 6-month plea agreement agreed upon, and I ripped it up and wouldn't sign a 6-month plea agreement. And I don't think the movie even captured that as detailed either. But there was a 6-month plea agreement that was offered, and I just couldn't imagine go to prison for 6 months. And then Ginger begged me to sign it. And then I looked at her and said, well, she's the reason why I'm in this mess in the first place. And I ripped it up and then went through the courts for 3 years instead to get 8.5 years instead. When I had 6 months, all I had to do was sign it. That's when the suicide attempt. But I think even wearing the wire for 3 years even had a lot to do with me making the poor decision of not signing that plea agreement.
Yeah.
I wasn't making good decisions by that point.
Right. Oh, my goodness. I can't imagine. And then when this whole thing, even the other guys that were at ADM, when they got sentenced, it seems like you got the worst sentence of everybody.
Well, I was getting the lowest, so I was going to get 6 months, and they were all going to get 3 years. So, that was my own. All I had to do was sign. I would have the least of anybody.
But as it turned out,
that was my own undoing by not accepting that plea agreement.
Yeah. And just the ego, the mental health, and all that played into that poor decision. Pride and so ended up being
mental health. I'd say had a lot to do with them, but also pride. I couldn't. At that point, I still had a lot of resources, and I hired lots of lawyers, and I thought I could really beat the case.
Yeah. So now so you're in federal prison, and it's amazing to me that your wife, just stuck with you all this time, and you were located at a couple of different places while you're in federal.
With good behavior, you move to a better place. That's the way it works.
And she moved with you just at wherever you were located.
3 different states.
And your
kids visit me every weekend.
Yeah.
Yes.
You had 3 children, right?
Right. One was in college. The 2 would move with her. One was in college when I started the federal system. I got out. This would have been 25 years ago. I got out 15 years ago. And they moved to each location, visit me every weekend.
You said
the divorce rate for the incarcerated is 78% for the incarcerated. And if you serve 5 years longer, depending on which agency it's in the 90+%. Some of them may even have as high as 99% for 5 years and longer.
And she's sticking with you and your kids
as
well. Yeah. Total miracle. And so you're in prison, and 2 different gentlemen enter your life while you're in prison. Let's talk about that, because that's kind of where the redemption with your wife starts. She was in there praying the whole time, but while you're in prison, you have 2 men that visit and make a big input.
One of them was right before prison, about 7 months before I went to prison, when I attempted suicide. A man named Ian Howells, CFO of a pharmaceutical company, 5 young children he had, his wife an attorney. He was reading about me in the newspaper. And he reached out 7 months before I went in. God put me on his heart. And he told me that prison is going to be the beginning of my life, and I'm going to find my true purpose in my life. I'm finding that the strangest thing ever before you start an 8.5-year system, that this is the beginning of my life. So I'm seeing this exact opposite of what he's sharing. And he wanted to take me through a Bible study, a study called Operation Timothy, introduced me to God. So that started 7 months before prison. And then the second week in prison, Chuck Colson, who went to prison for Watergate decades earlier in the 70s, because this would have been 1998. I was 40 years of age then. I'm 64 now. So Chuck Colson would have been about 60 years of age then. He reached out, and I tell you where I started sharing with him about what I was learning from Ian Howells. He came my second week in prison to visit me, and he said, "Mark, have you accepted Jesus yet? Have you surrendered your life?" And I said, "I got 8 years of college. I even had professors at Cornell say, if you believe in God, you can't be in my class. If you believe in God, you can't be a PhD scientist." I learned for 8 years Darwinism, Big Bang Theory, evolution. It was everything but God for 8 years in the sciences, because it was a secular school. It wasn't about creationism. It was all secular, Darwinism and evolution. And he asked me flat out, he said, "Mark, you don't think there's a PhD scientist that believes in God?" I said, "I don't think there's any. I'm absolutely not." And he started sharing with me as he mentored me and discipled me and helped me get through that science block. I remember the first he shared an article by Albert Einstein, that Albert Einstein said only God could create the universe, only God could create man. And then he sent me a book by Sir Isaac Newton. Sir Isaac Newton talked as much about Jesus as he did about science. Sir Isaac Newton.
There's so many.
But book after book and article after article. And through that journey is where I got the science block removed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was the influence of Ian or Chuck?
That would have been Chuck.
Chuck,
for sure.
okay.
Ian planted some important seed, and he gave me hope, and I wanted to believe, but Chuck helped remove that science block.
Yeah. Just for our young audience that doesn't know Chuck Colson, he was involved in the Watergate scandal with Richard Nixon, and he went to prison through I can't remember how long he was in prison, but while he was in prison, he came to faith in Jesus. And I think the book that he wrote after that was called Born Again. Is that right?
He did. He wrote 21 books, but that was his first book, Born Again.
Right. And, I've read several of his books. And then he also founded Prison Fellowship, which became one of the largest prison ministries, and
that's what he reached out to me for.
Probably in the world.
He had 1,000 employees. He had 30,000 volunteers, and he felt like him being president of Prison Fellowship, he should at least have one of this huge agency. And I was the one he was mentoring and discipling.
Yeah.
He read about me in the Washington Post.
And
but he was White House counsel for President Nixon, Fred.
Right. Yeah. One of the top guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he passed just a few years ago?
2012, April 21st, 2012.
A little longer than I was remembering.
Years ago. He was 80 years
okay.
ago, but he was sharing his faith to the end.
Yeah, great story there. So let's talk about your post-Christian career and kind of what happened. You get out of prison, your wife sticks with you, your kids stick with you. Your kids are now how old when you get out?
Well, let's see. The youngest, let's kind of go by. One was already in college when I went in. Our youngest was 6 when I started wearing a wire. He was 12 in 7th grade. He was 6 in 2nd grade when I was wearing a wire for 3 years, which I never saw him. You can imagine me with FBI every night having the debriefings. And even when I did see my family, it was one year. I was, wearing a wire for 10 hours. So I wasn't in the best state of mind to be engaged with the family during then. But he was 6 then. He was 12 when I went to prison. He was 21 in a junior college when I got out. But I saw him almost every weekend.
Yeah.
During that time.
Yeah. So
all my kids.
So you get out of prison, and how are you very employable at this point? Like what do you?
I didn't think I would be. That was why I tried to take my own life before.
Right.
But a couple of the Cornell professors started visiting me in prison. They read about me, and PhD students you get to know a little better than you would when you had 200 or 300 undergraduates. When I graduated my PhD, there were only 6 of us that graduated that whole year. So the professors get to know a lot better at a PhD level student. And so they started visiting me, some of the professors in prison, and some of those professors became Christians, and they started bringing biotech and pharmaceutical companies, because I was president of the biotech division of ADM with a PhD biochemist. And they started bringing company, and they had 4 offers for me the day I got out.
Oh my gosh.
4 offers. So I joined a biotech company named Cypress. I'm still on their advisory board still today, 15 years later. I joined Cypress Biotech, a cancer research company. And after 4 promotions, I became the COO, the number 2 executive of that company.
Wow.
A miracle.
It is a miracle. This whole story is miraculous.
But a Christian CEO, long-term thinking, a whole different culture than what I was used to before. Oh,
interesting. Yeah.
And I chose that specifically not to fall back in that greed trap.
Is Cypress publicly traded as well?
They're private.
Private company.
Private.
Okay.
They were a division of Fleischmann, publicly traded years ago, and that division was sold off to a private company.
Okay. All right. So, you got involved at some point in the Christian Businessman. I don't know what kind of fellowship it was, but
CBMC, Christian Businessmen Connection. That's where Ian Howells was a part of it, that reached out to me 7 months before I went to prison and planted that very important seed that Chuck Colson nurtured, that seed that Ian Howells. So that was CBMC, the group that reached out. And to kind of let you know, Fred, how that happened, when I became a Christian, it's June of 98. I'm only 3 months in. I've got 8 years yet to go. 8 years and 3 months yet to go. And I thought, well, I prayed about what would I do with my time. And I looked at that Bible that Chuck Colson gave me, the Operation Timothy, which was the introduction of God, the Bible study that CBMC Ian Howells gave to me, the two guys discipling me.
Okay.
And I started discipling guys one-on-one in prison. That same one-on-one, just to be productive with my time, but they became some of the most productive years of my life at $20 a month for 8.5 years. And I helped some of these guys get their GEDs and some of them get their 2-year degrees through correspondence. I'm telling you something, Fred. I learned how rewarding it was to help other people that I didn't know in that career before. Yeah, it was selfish leadership before. I learned what a servant leader was during that journey. So that was CBMC, that one-on-one discipleship. Mm-hmm. And eventually when I got out, they had me speak at their events when I got out 15 years ago. And I became the COO for almost 8 years at CBMC.
Okay. Yeah, I remember I heard one of your talks and you were saying, you'd helped a guy in prison get his GED, and then you helped him get 2 years of college under his belt while he was in prison. Then he got out, got his bachelor's in marketing, and you and your wife went and attended his graduation. He was top of his class. And you were saying just how meaningful it was to you to be involved in somebody's, and just a part of what God was doing in somebody else's life like that. And it was, it just like meant the world to you. And I thought that was such a beautiful,
rewarding. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so rewarding. And I thought there was no 7-figure bonus, no Falcon 50 corporate jet. No, I had the Ferrari and the 2 BMW, 8-car garage full of 8 cars. And there was nothing as much as ever as rewarding as that moment of seeing someone else improve their life. And I learned the journey of brokenness.
Yeah. Yeah. The power of serving others for a higher purpose, for God's purpose. So
life of significance instead of this life of success track I was on before in my 30s.
So beautiful. It's so important. Jesus is our role model for servant leadership, but, even in the recovery world I've been working in for a couple of years, that part of the program of service to others is such a big part. You keep your sobriety, your sanity by giving it away, and so good stuff. Well, so let's talk about sort of spirituality in the workplace and, what your role with T-Factor is, because for those who are listening, I saw you first at a conference I went to. It was held for my Kansas City audience at Jack Stack Fiorella's event place. Acumen is a company that mentors CEOs, and they had sponsored one of your events called T-Factor. And that's where I heard you first share your story at T-Factor. And I was going, oh my gosh, because I just wasn't expecting that kind of story to basically lead off this whole, I think it was a half-day conference for CEOs that I was attending. So introduce our audience to your work with Coke Consolidated and T-Factor and what that's all about.
Yeah, I've been speaking at the T-Factor events for 4 or 5 years, and I've been full-time with them, leading that initiative, leading that division for the last almost 2 years. And T-Factor, T stands for transformation, and Coca-Cola Consolidated is the bottling side of Coca-Cola. So if Frank Harrison is the CEO, we're on the NASDAQ, the Coca-Cola company is on the New York Stock Exchange. So they are 2 different companies. We're the bottling side, different ownership, different board, different CEOs. And our purpose statement of Coca-Cola Consolidated is to honor God in all you do, to serve others, pursue excellence, and grow profitably. But it's that to honor God in all we do is this mission and this purpose. And the company lives it out. We have 17,000 teammates, and our goal is these 17,000 teammates all to become the servant leaders that God designed them to be. And at T-Factor, what we do is the faith journey at Coca-Cola Consolidated has been happening in the last 22 years. 119-year-old company, but the last 22 years, it became a faith-based company with God in the center. And we have chaplains in 102 plants, chaplains at each plant, prayer groups, Bible studies. I mean, it's an outreach ministry. It's kind of like what we call BAM, business as ministry. well, bam.
Yeah, that's
and
awesome.
T Factor we share with other leaders, with other we have 250, like the event you were at on June 10th. We have 250 CEOs and CEOs from around the world. Usually 10 to 15% of those are from outside of the country. And these used to be in person. Now they're virtual because of the COVID world kind of made them virtual. And what we do is we share that journey and the impact that has on our culture and our company by having God first. I mean, even non-Christians say, boy, I love this culture. I love this servant leadership, this community-minded, this purpose-driven culture.
Right.
And even some of those, you're planting seeds, and some of those are going to become Christians in that journey.
Yeah.
One of the goals.
Yeah. So I'm thinking about, some people listening might be CEOs of smaller businesses or larger businesses, either way. Some of them are private. Most of them are probably privately owned that are listening right now. But then I have other people who are working for companies, and I even as I was talking to people telling them about this interview, they were like, well, how can I encourage my CEO to get, because I think there's a lot of CEOs out there who would like to be more faith-based, but they're worried about the legalities of, most companies would have people who are agnostic or Buddhist or Muslim or Christian or whatever. There's a big, broad umbrella of workers. You want to be able to encourage all of your workers. And at the same time, this faith-based environment can be almost like a huge added benefit to employee culture. And add a real positive to the culture, even without violating, other people's belief systems, right? Or honoring all people's belief systems at the same time, maybe is a better way to say it. But that's the curious piece, I think, that a lot of people wrestle with. Well, how can I do this? And what are the pitfalls that we need to avoid? But what are the ways that we can encourage faith-based atmospheres?
And that's a very important part, as you recall from T Factor, is our attorneys sharing. Jeff Patton and Sonia Richburg, and Jeff Patton is one of our outside attorneys, and they share during T Factor that all this is legal. Prayer groups and Bible studies and discipleship and chaplains in your plan. The key is that it's optional. You can't require someone to come in the room and pray with you. Can't require for them to go see a chaplain in your plant site or at your headquarters. It's all it has to be volunteer and has to be optional. But that's how you make it legal. So therefore, if someone wants to bring their whole self to work and see a chaplain when they're there, well, they can.
Right.
And they want to start a prayer group or be part of a prayer group, they can, but you can't require it.
Right.
And so for your attendees that have that curiosity, we'd love to have them at a T Factor event. The markwhitaker.com website.
Yes.
And that's Whitaker, WHITACRE. It has my contact information. And we'd love to invite them we do them every couple months, and love to invite them to a future T Factor event.
Yeah. And when we release this, I'll put in the liner notes some links to that as well, to your website. So they can
put my email. Feel free to.
Okay. Perfect. Because I think that's the thing, and some of the larger privately owned companies, I mean, maybe like Chick-fil-A, is Chick-fil-A private? Or are they?
Yes, they are.
They're private.
Hobby
Lobby. Yeah. People are aware of some of their faith-based culture, right. I think, but then they worry about it.
We're a public company.
I know. That's the thing I thought was so fascinating. They had it to where you could text questions, and I was texting and they were answering. I was probably, you guys had it together, man. But yeah, because I was curious at a publicly traded company, how you can, even because you talked about servant opportunities that you make available. And so I was thinking, well, if you're paying employees and then they want to volunteer their time for a nonprofit effort, how does that work? Do you really end up having to pay your employees to do?
And we do some of that. And we have our HR director talk about that very thing in detail at T Factor. And we do some of that. We allow our employees to do that. But that's a choice a company can make. Some companies will add all layers of what we share at T Factor. Some will choose 2 or 3 things and that add into their company. But we do find that after we follow up with attendees, we are finding that 68% of our attendees in the last couple of years have implemented at least one thing they learned at T Factor. Maybe start a prayer group, maybe hired a chaplain. So some would, do one thing, some would do 5 or 6 of the things we share.
Yeah. And, with a lot of people that listen to me or have been involved in the recovery world where sobriety is about, they don't name the we just say higher power in that 12-step world. And so people can kind of choose their own path. And, the brilliance of that was that we had people who needed to be sober who were atheist or agnostic. And if you did Jesus or the Bible, it just scared them away. It's like they're out. But what's fascinating is that if you let them take small steps and don't try to, force or manipulate, the spiritual life is really fun to watch grow in people's life, even in small incremental ways. And so my thought is that if you have a faith-based friendly company and you have a big umbrella of people who are anywhere from atheist to agnostic to Buddhist to Muslim, still having that, a spirituality in the workplace that's not, you're not antagonistic toward that you offer support for people who want that. It's so, it almost becomes like an added cultural plus and a benefits package. I mean, I'm thinking for the CEOs who are thinking bottom line, and it's like, well, why would I do this? And well, it's like almost like in my mind, a benefits package that adds a lot to a lot of people's lives. And if you're there for somebody's family in crises, think about how big that, think about those guys that stepped into your life when you were in crisis. If they'd have been from ADM,
how that changed my life?
No, but it's like, how that changed your life. And so families that are working for you go through crises. And when you're there for them in a loving, supportive way and even in a spiritual way, it's really powerful, right? So,
well, it's for good for God. It's what Jesus wants to do. But in addition to that, it's good for business, your retention rate, your absenteeism. It's your culture is more positive. People work more productively. It's good for your business because people want to come to work.
Yeah. And I don't know if you guys, but I've heard often that money is a short-term motivator, right? So you want people working for you for more than just a paycheck. You want a mission that people can buy into. You want a culture that people can buy into that's worth living for. Yeah, so I love that.
We hear that even from some of our believers love it because they can bring their whole self to work. The Christians and the non-believers, we hear it often from them that they love the culture, that it's so welcoming and so inclusive. And they love how it's community focused, and they love that they have a servant leader as a supervisor. So the non-believers on our engagement surveys that we do with our employees, they give great feedback also.
Yeah.
Loving the culture.
Right. I think I was told, I don't know this true. You might be able to know this, but I heard even like Harvard Business School started trying to teach, in their MBA program to look at nonprofits as a model for leadership. Some of the best nonprofits, because, you think about like in my church, I had over 2,000 volunteers in my workforce. They didn't get paid a dime, and most of those volunteers would have even given money to the organization on top of giving their time. Right.
Yeah.
And so why are they doing that? Well, they're doing it because of the mission, and they're bought into the mission, and it's even bigger than themselves. And it's an important, life-changing mission. So if corporations could adopt some of that sort of missional focus with their companies, then the buy-in is so much deeper for employees. It's not just a paycheck kind of a thing. So I don't know.
Employees start seeing this life of significance versus life of success.
Yeah.
And they feel more engaged than just a paycheck. They feel part of a community, part of a family.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. And we spend so much of our time at work.
Yeah.
So,
well, Jesus, I don't know if you knew this, but I learned this through the CBMC and through Chuck Colson through being discipled, but he's in Scripture 132 times, Jesus says. And you can Google this, and it's sourced 132 times. 122 of them were in the marketplace because that's where the people were. They were. So 92% of his public appearances was in the marketplace. Jesus is showing us that that's where the people are. That's where people spend their time.
Yeah.
At work.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Well, and even if you go back to the creation story and you look at the roles that you're given in the garden, to watch and tend the garden.
Yeah.
And that was actually, those are some of the words for work and it's like a priestly function to care for and to be stewards of this world and the planet and the mission that God's given us.
Genesis 2:15.
Right.
Genesis 2:15. What's the first thing God did when he created man? He put him to the Garden of Eden to work.
To tend.
And when he created Eve, he put her to work and maintain the garden.
That combination of words to watch and to tend are, after that, it's used for priests throughout the rest of the Hebrew Bible. And so it's showing that the work is a missional, priestly kind of function that I think that we're called to. So, yeah, Jesus in the workplace. I did a series on that one time, and it's good stuff.
Okay, good, good.
Well,
I think he shows us how and what to do. And, all of this said, for everything we discussed here during our time together, my wife gets asked this often. We just did an event in Nashville together at the Life Fest Christian Music Festival. Just got back on Sunday, just a couple of days ago. But during this event, we get asked this often. They ask, well, what would have happened if your husband signed the 6-month sentence, the 6-month plea agreement? And my wife is quick to say, even though she was mad and furious at the time, 25 years ago when I didn't sign that, we both look back. Our adult children now look at that too and say, I would have never listened to an Ian Howells or a Chuck Colson with a 6-month plea agreement. I would say, I'm out of here in 6 months. So God gave me exactly what I needed. And the 6-month sentence probably would have been the worst thing for me to sign it.
Isn't that crazy?
Because I don't think I would have became a Christian.
Right. Yeah. Isn't that crazy to think about those things like that? It's like, man, good crazy. God working through all of that tragedy, God working through all of that to bring redemption and hope. And that's what I said. The more I read and listened to you in your story, it gave me hope too, because I've gone through some pretty dark times here the last couple of years. And I'm like, man, we need hope like this. People need hope.
We all do.
People land in dark places sometimes of their own decisions, and sometimes situations that are beyond their control, and to have to come to that place where, man, God can meet me in this and do something.
Take a life from ashes to beauty, living proof of marriage that survived all of that.
Yeah.
42 years married, a miracle. Working for the company, the largest victim of the price fixing for high fructose corn syrup was Coca-Cola. Working for the company that basically was stealing from 30 years ago. I mean, only God could have done this. Only God.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Well, thanks so much for joining us on Spirituality Adventures. Let's talk real quickly about how people can connect. We've already mentioned it quickly once, but your website is markwhitacre.com, which is WHITACRE, Whitaker, right? And then you have at your website, you have a bunch of links. You can just click on some of the links to the stories, to places you've talked, to some of the work that you're doing. I think even T Factor, the documentary that Discovery Channel did on you guys is all there. Also the book? Tell me about you said 3 books, and I know the first one we mentioned was the one that the movie was based on. There was a second one, and then the one that you guys worked on is what is Against All Odds? Is that the title?
Yes, Mark Whitacre, Against All Odds. It came out 10 years later, so it has the other two came out right when I entered prison. Rats in the Grain by James Lieber, an attorney. Probably the more accurate of the books versus Informant, but it is like a little bit encyclopedic. I'd say it's more of a documentary than Kurt Eichenwald wrote a more exciting drama, kind of a narrative. I mean, he almost wrote it in a movie style, like Reading the Firm and The Informant. And then Rats in the Grain by James Lieber, the attorney, they both came out at the same time, right when I entered prison. I became a Christian after I entered prison. And we wrote a book called Against All Odds a decade later that kind of has the rest of the story of the last 25 years. What happened after entering prison in 1998?
Yeah.
Rest of the story, the faith journey.
Right. So good. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time, and thanks for sharing with our audience your story and the hope that gives so many. And then also, I'm going to be I'm going to be doing some interviews with CEOs over the next few weeks, and I will be encouraging those guys and some of them already are connected with T Factor, but some aren't. So I'll be encouraging them to check out all of those sites. And thank you so much for your time. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks for joining us at Spirituality Adventures, and we will see you next time. This concludes today's episode. Thanks for tuning in and listening. Remember, if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to my YouTube channel. Remember to like, share, or subscribe to the social media platform that you're using. And then go to our website, spiritualityadventures.com, and make a one-time donation, or you can subscribe monthly and receive our special bonus content. Thanks so much.